Welcome to the Football Science Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the physiology, biomechanics and anatomy of the world of football. I'm joined by my co-host Joe, so let's get into the discussions.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, what is sports science? What does it actually mean?
On a more broader scale, sports science is probably the blend of anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, and usually it's an application to sports, but also can be exercise. And obviously we're going to be talking about from a football's point of view, but it crosses many sports disciplines and health and fitness.
So you mainly just focus on football, that's your expertise?
Yeah, I would say so. I studied a broader sense of the word, but over the last some years I've been fortunate enough to be in football and apply it more now from elite football settings, yeah.
So you've worked at like the top clubs?
Yeah, so when I first did my degree, you obviously want to go out and work in the world of sport. That's a lot of young people's ambitions, I suppose, when they start the sport. So I did like a Roy Keane on it. So I don't know if he emailed the clubs, but I heard he contacted many clubs to try and get his first trial. So I did the same thing. I emailed 72 clubs actually. I still haven't written down. And two of them got back to me. Obviously Real Madrid and Barcelona at the time couldn't afford me, so I got back from Everton and actually and Cardiff. And Cardiff said yes, there's an opportunity. So I went over there, spent 8 months at that club, and then I moved on to Blackburn Rovers, and then started a snowball started to happen. Worked at Liverpool, then Wales national team, and then after a short period of time in Liverpool, went to Man City. I was at Man City for about 7 years before deciding to set up my own company. So my own company now, SDM Performance. So I still actually consult for Man City, the City Football Group. I work for the Scottish national team, and I do my own individual clients on the side.
Okay, amazing. So obviously your career, you've been around the block almost to say. How would you say it's changed? Have you seen changes? Has it become more prominent? Is it, like what's that change been like in terms of your industry? How does it look?
Yeah, in terms of the football side of sports science, I think it's evolved quite a lot. I think when sports science first came on the scene, it was almost trying to over justify itself. I think we got too involved in maybe some of the decisions on players and stuff like that, and try to quantify everything and try to say that players weren't ready to train and play, and we probably overcooked it and over-egged it to try and justify our impact in the game. And we've kind of relaxed over, I think, a number of years and actually found a really nice niche and embedded ourselves properly in an organisation. I think, football is the heart of everything, and we're the support network around it. So I think we now understand a bit more of the game, so we can embed the principles that we learn in college and uni and experience and all that, and we kind of know how to impact something. Like, they say knowledge and wisdom are different things. Knowledge is knowing tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And I think you learn all these principles, you learn all the knowledge, and then the wisdom comes to how you apply it. I think we're more wise as practitioners now in our industry.
I think now more than ever, general fans of football will probably appreciate there's a lot more going into just the 11 people on the pitch. There's obviously a massive support network at the biggest clubs, the ones that you've worked with especially. I mean, we're seeing that, like, during lockdown, post-COVID era, teams are playing a lot more football than they've ever played. We've seen the likes of Jurgen Klopp come out and be, rightfully or wrongfully, very vocal on the issue of the games and how much they play. So have you found that, it's becoming more and more important for clubs to have not only people who deal in sports science, but, really elite level practitioners of that expertise?
Yeah, I think, and you've seen the impact of that as well. I mean, if you were to rewind the clock maybe 20 years ago, you saw an evolution of physicality come into the game. You saw a lot of statistics rise in terms of high-speed running, sprint distance, like exponentially get more demanding. The games, 50% increase, 70-something% increase, and over 20 years even more so. So you've seen the demand of the game go up, and now the frequency of the game really high. But you also have injuries that are on the rise as well. So there's still issues in our sport. I mean, I don't think we should have as many injuries as we do have. I think we need to understand those a little bit better. But I think the influx of sports science and physio and all the people that are around it has improved the game, and you can see that from the physicality of these players, the turnover of games, the recovery that's needed. Yeah, so players are buying into it a little bit more as well. Players are investing in themselves. I think if you look at close seasons now, off seasons now, they're very different to what they were back in the day. You know, players would almost come back unfit and overweight or whatever, but now it's the opposite. Players are coming back just as fit if they didn't, and maybe there's a need for them to switch off a bit more or whatever, but they don't really get that much switch off. So they're almost fit throughout the season, if you know what I mean.
So your role within a club, obviously there's a structure. There's the apex being the head coach or the technical director who work in tandem to make sure that 11 players go out there, or however many subs are all fit, healthy. How does your role fit into, you're not maybe coaching the players on what to do per se tactically in a game, but understanding the body? Are you working with the strength and conditioning? Are you in charge of the strength and conditioning? How does that all come together as an ecosystem?
Yeah, a lot of times in football, and sometimes it's separated, sports science and S&C sort of blend themselves together. You're kind of doing a little bit of both, or you have an appreciation for both at least. Maybe your lead role is in one and maybe not the other, but you certainly have an influence in both. So you're obviously looking at the game demands that are crucial. And I think the more we understand of the game, the more we're impactful on the player. And a discussion where I'd like to go into is some of the mechanics that are involved in some of the technical side of things. Like we're going to talk about free kicks in a minute. But if you understand a little bit more about what's needed for a particular player and a particular position, I think you can inform your practice even more, rather than almost saying it's just a game of football and now I'm going to prepare athletes for the best I can prepare them. But if you understand what you're actually preparing them for, I think that has a big impact in your decision making off the pitch. And then if we come off the pitch into the S&C world, I think it's very important that players get the right program for their gym. Not everyone needs the same stuff. Not everyone needs as much as the other person. And obviously there's a belief system as well that dictates a lot of the things you can and can't do with players. But I think if S&C coaches and sports scientists alike understand the game a little bit in more context, and I mean from a deeper understanding, I think it informs their practice more. I have this belief in football that sports science in particular and S&C is that we've almost made the complex kind of things really simple, and we've made the simple things really complex, and that's to the detriment of our development, I think, because like if you take an exercise like a Nord board, I'm not criticizing Nordics, but I'm just saying that we understand Nordics to such a deep level. We take so many statistics from that one test, yet we don't often understand the ins and outs of the hamstrings. We don't appreciate there's 4 different hamstrings, on each leg, so we don't appreciate where they originate in a cert. And then because we don't know that, we don't know what their function might be in 3 planes of motion, which I think is something we're going to discuss in a bit more detail. But I think if you go down to complexity and you understand the complexity, then you can make it simple. But I think we've made something quite simple, like a Nordic, and made complexity that way, as opposed to going down the rabbit hole of the actual hamstrings, the thing you're conditioning.
I think this obviously conversation ties into a lot of the fitness industry as well. Like there's always a new exercise, there's always a new training. We've seen like CrossFit come out and all of a sudden it's boomed. It's obviously got its pros, it's got its cons. I don't think there's many elite footballers who are going out and trying to do an Enon workout. Obviously, because it's not really going to work for their bodies. But seems to be a lot of times with the fitness industry, there's a hot new thing. And obviously, I suppose from where you're coming from, you've got to work out very quickly. Okay, what's going on with that exercise? Is it gonna be a positive impact for my player and the team as a whole? How do you find you incorporating things like that into the training schedules for players? Do players come to you and say, look, I've seen this? Or do you have a very much, that player, where they should be now and in 3 months? How do you decipher that, all that information that you've got to collect and then distribute between how many players you're looking after at any one time? It must be quite a lot.
Yeah, if you're in a squad, you may have 25 to 30 players, and I find myself looking after maybe 10 individual clients now. Like, just as a practitioner, I think you have to operate somewhere in the middle of the research at one end and then this trendy stuff at the other end, and you have to appreciate both spheres. Now, you might gravitate towards research and you might gravitate towards Instagram influence or whatever it might be, but being neglectful of either, I think, is bad for you. So if you know what the research is, what's coming out, what's been looked at, what is, it's in depth, you can inform your knowledge base and whatever else, but it's usually a little bit dated because it takes a long time for a paper to come out. Then you've got the other trendy stuff that maybe isn't research yet, but there is some gold there, and there's also some nonsense there. So you as a practitioner need to understand what actually those exercises are doing, or the trends that are coming. You need to understand them, kind of break them down, have your own filtering system into what's good, what's bad. And the research, you need to be informed by that, and then you need to sit somewhere in the middle, know what's there and know what's on the other side. Because what your players are tending to do, they'll sit more on the what's on Instagram, because it's easy kind of information to gather and stuff. If you're unaware of what's out there, then you're not informed for what might come your way. So once you've kind of have that grounding of understanding of from both ends, then you can go and apply yourself to an athlete. And now when you're applying yourself to an athlete, one of the biggest things for me is always their sport, and within their sport, what is their demand? Because we're talking about sport, we're talking about football here. A goalkeeper has a different demand to a striker, for instance, and a centre half will be different again. So it does alter the sport. The sport has a big influence on my decision making and their position and their demand in it, especially at the elite level, because you're looking for marginal gains here. You're not always looking for 20% gains, 30% gains. You're looking for the smaller margins. And once the basics are done right, then you can start looking for where can I improve this athlete on a physical side that helps and complements his technical game. I think that's the kind of level that I like to operate. I like to analyze someone's movement, and then from there kind of see where we can take them. And usually if you dig deep enough into a player's reflection of his game, there will be areas to improve. Now you'll have your traditional S&C, and you have your strengthening, you have your power and stuff that you have to cover those things, but then there's an opportunity for you to have an impact on his technical side, because some technical limitations can be a physical connotation to them, or can be like your ability to be technically good can be restricted by some physical limitation. So if you understand that, then you can have a massive impact on the player's development.
Well, and I know you've got certain topics that you want to touch on. I think sport's a great one, because we've got handfuls of really great examples of, if we say basketball, how certain people do certain actions, and football's the same. So I know one that you wanted to touch on was like free kicks, and obviously a certain player in particular, and we can reverse engineer and take a look at what's going on when that person takes that free kick, and what makes them so good at it, and why were they so special at that very specific thing.
Yeah. So the topic I want to talk about is obviously free kicks, and David Beckham being one of the best in the business. If you look back at these free kicks, have been amazing. And what the coolest thing when I was doing my research on it and just making sure I was well equipped to have this conversation, when you start researching David Beckham and you put in David Beckham free kick, you'll see a similar image come up all the time, and it's amazing to see that, because he has I would call them critical features of a movement, and you can apply critical features principle to a lot of things like sprinting, change direction, free kicks, whatever. You can use the critical features thing on a lot of things, but his free kick looked quite similar, even though it was probably a slightly
almost
different demand.
Identical.
Yeah, almost. And he had that David Beckham line that came out.
It's iconic. Silhouette. It's almost like the jump man,
it is
of Jordan.
It's the Jordan thing. So he had that, and like I want to kind of break that down a little bit into what actually needs to happen for David to make the that impact on the ball.
What's actually going on? What does he do? What does he do so perfectly that he's obviously practiced thousands of times? Which he spoke about himself, and coaches have said, when training finished, David would stay on the field and just hit free kicks for hours. What's actually going on from his body perspective to do that?
So there's one thing there, obviously, that's repetition. Repetition is important, and it's what a young player need to recognize that. Like, you know, it doesn't come overnight. His success of free kicks has been down to repetition. But that aside, and we could talk about that, and that's more of a completely technical side of things. But if you just take a step back and you go, well, the body needs to be allowed to do what it's doing in repetition. You know, so if there's restrictions in the body, you can do as many repetitions as you like. But if your body doesn't allow you to do these things, then that's going to be restricting you. So, for instance, if you look at that line that we talked about, if you even just did the distance from his foot to his hip, just before contact on the ball, right? It's like a meter long. Now, if you're ever trying to recreate that statically, if I just stood there and tried to move my hip a meter away from my foot, you'd fall over. It's almost impossible to do it static. And the reason why he can do it is because he's in motion. He's moving as he does it. But if we take it from the bottom up, there's crucial things happening. Like at his foot, he's got excessive pronation, excessive eversion of the foot. So that range that he has in his ankle needs to be there for him to be able to get into the position from the ground up. And then if you look at his hip, the hip is going through what we call frontal plane motion. So you've got 3 planes of motion, right? You got sagittal, which is forward and back, up and down. You got frontal, which is left and right planes, and you got transverse, which is your rotational planes, right? So in particular, what's happening there, the frontal plane of the hip, the motion like left to right of his hip is excessive, massively goes into a deep position. And then the hand that drives up as well, you can kind of almost recall and see it happening. The hand also drives the hip more into rotation. So the spine is going to a certain amount of rotation. So if over time, if he plays a lot of football or isn't looking after himself, the ability to get into those ranges can be restricted, and that will cause him to have less power on the ball. Because remember, the demand placed on someone, or demand on anything, is usually task and environment specific. So what is the task? The task is to get the ball over a wall which is 10 meters away. Now the wall is roughly 6 foot, statically, you just stood still, but rises to 7 foot if the guys jump, right? So you have to get over a 7 foot wall and dip underneath the crossbar and away enough from the keeper and at the right speed and whatnot. So what you need to be able to do is create a spin on the ball. So the reason why Beckham goes into that really deep position is to make the angle of the kick, the purchase on the ball, the right angle to create the right spin and low enough to get over that wall and high enough to dip under. Because if it just goes completely under it, it's gone over the crossbar, If it goes completely too high, it hits the first man. So it's a really fine line, getting the right contact on the ball with the right angle of the approach and to hit the ball low enough and high enough to do what I just said, but also a nice spin on the ball. Because what you do is you create this Magnus effect on the ball. So you spin one end and the other end is obviously spinning. It's just that motion through the air. Helps if you look at some of David Beckham's free kicks, not all of them now, they go up and down, but they're also out to in, So it's that angle that he creates on the ball, creates that outward to inward, but then that up and down sort of action that he sees on the ball. And that has all got to do with his body allowing him to get low enough and wide enough to create that spin and that person. Now, this has all happened subconsciously on him. He's not consciously thought about that, and I'm not saying that you should consciously teach your athletes to do this. But if you as a practitioner understand what's going on, then you can go back to the gym and go, so if his frontal plane hip starts to reduce in his range, or his motion of that lateral hip is down, we know where we need to give him more freedom.
So obviously Beckham, he retired however many seasons ago, and obviously he wasn't at his peak 10 years ago. We remember that he scored that famous free kick for England that got them through to the World Cup qualifier against Greece. Yeah. If we went back 20 years, whenever that was, do you think the sports scientists then would have had a full understanding of what was going on? Or would it have only been like maybe the last 10 years that they would have been able to break this down fully to understand, okay, or am I overstretching it, and at the time they knew exactly what was going on and they were making sure that Beckham was taking care of his body in those areas to make sure that he could continue to do that? Because obviously Beckham, if you think about him as a player, that was probably his greatest asset was his right foot and his free kick, especially because they were always so accurate. They always done what was needed of him, especially in big moments as well. Yeah. So would you say that back then the coaches were aware of what was going on, or is this maybe just a thing that has developed within coaching, so that we now can understand what was happening at the time?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's really hard to know, I guess, what exactly was going on. But I think we're getting better understanding it. We're taking the time to go into it a bit more detailed. I suppose we're in it longer as practitioners, where we're seeing a lot of more discussions around actually what's going on, where we're having these deeper discussions. I don't think we were having them maybe 20 years ago, but the practitioners that were there, I know some of the physios well equipped to do what we're talking about here. Yeah. So they were probably on it on the bed and the maintenance of his profile and everything else. So I'm sure they were. I mean, he would have been restricted, far sooner if they hadn't been, of course, but I think just on a larger scale, I think we're understanding it a little bit better, or at least this is what this podcast is all about, is to try and go deeper into these discussions, because I also feel like a few of the medias that are out there at the minute, I know this is digressing slightly, but it doesn't allow for these conversations to happen,
open discourse of issues
to happen too often. So say I have an opinion and you have an opinion and we want to have a discussion. We need to fully exhaust our opinions and you need to fully exhaust your opinion. Otherwise it's kind of like I cut off the corners to get a point. And if I say something inflammatory, that's going to rise your emotions.
I'm going to become defensive.
And then we're going to have this argument, this conflict that we shouldn't have, because it doesn't bring us forward. It doesn't bring me forward in my development. It doesn't bring you forward. But if I get across my point and I fully exhaust what I'm coming at, you might see it from my angle, I might see it from your angle, and then our conversation has gravitated our understanding further, and then we've taken something from it. It's not that you've taken my belief forward or I've taken your belief forward or whatever. It's not that we can't have differences of opinions. But we'd only grow more as people, as practitioners, as people working with these athletes, more if we can have these open and honest discussions, because there's something to be learned from everyone. But the problem is a lot of the information gathering is on platforms whereby you can have these deep discussions. Something might be said as inflammatory, the mob get involved, and it's like, and these younger practitioners are witnessing this, and that's not helpful, I don't think.
I think what we're trying to do here is like, you're the expert here, so or you can at least explain to someone like me what is actually happening in these moments. So if I just look at it, I'm like, Beckham, he's always been a great free kick taker, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the way you explained it there, you've broke it down, individual movements and, little pockets, if you look at it, as the image of him, his foot is quite far away from his hip. So he's creating that almost like golf swing leverage.
Yeah.
When I look at it, why do you think, and maybe there's just out there, why has no one been able to replicate that, or we just not seeing it? Why has no one looked at Beckham's free kick and said, I'm going to be the next David Beckham? Because he is arguably the most famous footballer ever, if not one of the most famous people that ever lived, celebrities. It's crazy the pulling power. As obviously Qatar, they probably got that World Cup maybe scrupulously, but they use David Beckham for a reason. He adds a familiar face that people trust. That's just from being an amazing footballer for 10, 15 years, maybe 20. Why do you think no one's actually replicated Beckham's style from a free kick expert? Like maybe there is, maybe there's someone out there who bends it like Beckham better than Beckham. But I don't know if I've seen anyone who's better than him at that right foot free kick.
Yeah, I don't think that there has been, and then probably the saddest bit of it is it's a skill that just needs repetition. It's not like I'm not saying there's no genetic potential in it, or I'm not saying he's not been gifted with something, but it's been repetition that's really been the catalyst for him being so successful. So all that's missing on someone's development is the repetition of free kicks and whatever, an obsession to be better at them. And if you look at like elite footballers, right, there's always something or some things that separate them from the rest, if you like, and his was definitely dead ball specialist. And it's not a you'd expect after David Beckham to have more and more of these players, but you don't have them. They're not. James Ward-Prowse maybe in the Premier League is kind of similar in some ways to how successful he is at free kicks. James Maddison maybe another one, but they're not dotted around everywhere. And I do believe that when you're as a young academy footballer, if you are training, I think it's not always in everyone's syllabus to do dead ball specialist, because it only appeals to one or two people, because not everyone can take a free kick. But I do think there should be an opportunity for kids to practice, or kids should take the opportunity to practice these things, because like you said, it could be the thing that separates them from everyone else in the team. It could be something that provides a team with massive opportunity every time there's a set piece. These are these things that I don't think you can acquire once you get to first team level. I think you've got to acquire it from a younger age. So unless these players are practicing free kicks from 16, 17 and even younger, I don't think you get the skills.
It's not just going to happen when they're 27.
No. You've lost
it
so
needs
many
to be 10,000 hour.
So there's a rule of like 10,000 hours to become an expert in something, right? So there's a paper on it, and it's well established and it's been quoted quite a bit. Now, if you dig into the research of the 10,000 hour rule, there's a lot of limitations to it. Actually, a lot of the people got expert with far less than 10,000 hours, and to get 10,000 hours of playing football is almost impossible to get. Players have been expert with 4,000 or 5,000 hours, but the principle is right in some ways. Maybe not the number. I think the number is maybe inaccurate, but I think the idea of it is good. So you need deliberate practice. You need to be practicing it deliberately, not just messing about taking free kicks, or not just being lazy with it, right? So, and the thing is, the 10,000 hour rule is usually on more closed skill as opposed to open skill. So there's a difference between an open skill and a closed skill. An open skill is the football, the dynamic environment, the chaotic environment. A closed skill is like a corner. A corner is the same spot every time. Obviously, there's different set pieces, but it's generally speaking, the same spot, usually similar distance, or a free throw in basketball, same spot every time. So that's a closed skill. There's obviously environmental factors that change, but the task is usually similar, right? So free kick is a closed skill. Now, the demand might be different where the free kick is, how far out it is from the goal and whatever, but it is a closed skill, and it needs repetition. Now, 10,000 hours I think is totally inaccurate for something like that, but you need hundreds of hours, and if you're not practicing 100 hours, then I don't think you ever acquire the skills that are needed to be at that level, that expert level. Because if you think of the task of like that free kick you mentioned against Greece, like the pressure situation of that, everyone looking at it, it's like one moment to get it. Like you have to be psychologically right, you have to be right, and you only get to that psychological security with a level of practice.
In-game practice as well.
In-game practice.
To be able to do
yes.
that in front of a full stadium.
Yeah,
it requires another skill, which
absolutely.
I think these conversations are going to be covering a range, not just the body, but how does a player get to that level? There's multiple things that need to go perfectly for a Beckham, or a Ronaldo or a Messi. It's not just they were born with a natural ability. They've got to have gone through all these stages and and also, rightly say it, being coached a certain way. They haven't just found their way into professional football. They've came through the ranks, and we're talking about elite players who've went through academies. They've battled to be where they are, and they're obviously still battling, especially in the Premier League. It's the best players. We're seeing it in the World Cup. We're looking at some amazing athletes in front of us, so we can look at it and break it down. How does someone get there? And it's not just a physical ability, is it? There's more to it than just he could jump this high because his legs were shaped the certain way, or he had this muscle mass. There's something more going on there, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the psychological security that maybe David Beckham had to take that free kick, to take it on. He couldn't be fearful, and he had to go for it at that moment. But it's all those hours that he practiced that he knew, like, he was able to, like, subconsciously almost adjust his body, even in the run up, the flight of there might be a wind there, all this external environmental factors that are going on only can get handled really, really well and appropriately if there's the hours of practice beforehand. So you could be psychologically, robust and whatever else, but you also need the technical skills. You need to, you need to have them and the hours done behind you to execute the skill at the moment.
Absolutely.
And then also you need the body to be able to get into those positions. So you kind of need it all working in sync. And yes, you said about the environment, practicing in environments, like he would have had a youth cup, youth level and so on, and that practiced environment. But then always that's your sort of test So your test is a game. So you might test it in a game. You want to get 2 tests, 2 opportunities to test it. But then you have to go back to the drawing board and practice and reflect and go, okay, what went wrong? And it's only through that repetition of almost reviewing and doing, So that has to happen. But without either, I don't think you get to those levels that he gets to. And 1, the body needs to be able to do it. 2, you need to be psychologically robust to take on. And then 3, you need repetition.
So it's been really insightful listening to you talking. So thank you for sharing all the information on David Beckham. I know we're going to discuss different topics on another episode, but I'm looking forward to carrying on the conversation.
Yeah, like I really enjoyed it myself. It's probably an opportunity for me to get out my thoughts, into a podcast. And there's more to come for sure. There's more things I want to talk about. There's more insight I suppose I want to share. So, thanks to listeners for listening in and watching in. And there's more episodes to come. So I hope you're interested.